right, everybody. Welcome back to the seminar track. Reminder to please double check that phone. Make sure it's turned down to silent or vibrate. And also want to say a nice hello to everybody watching us live on the Geek Gamer TV Twitch channel. Our next presenter is truly a titan of the golden age of arcade gaming, having designed and programmed some of the most iconic, quintessential titles in Atari history. To tell us what it was like creating that history, please put your hands together for the legendary Ed Logg.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here. Don't get out very much. I wanted to just show you my last business card from Atari. It's on the screen there. If you notice, my title is Super Duper Game Guy. I did not create that. I was at Atari Games. I was doing N64, Wayne Gretzky hockey for the N64. And I was going to a game show and I needed business cards. So I went to the secretary and said, I need business cards. And she asked me, what title do you want? I don't know. And then one of the producers had me walking by and said, Super Duper Game Guy. So the receptionist or the assistant looked at me and shrugged, okay, Super Duper Game Guy it is. So that's how I got my game title. This is my Atari badge. I'm employee number 3025. So I don't know when that was. I was probably taken when I came back to Atari to do a lot of the consumer titles. You probably wanted to know how early development was. I joined Atari in February of 1978. And you are probably used to something totally different than I did when I got there. I came from a mainframe business, so when I got there, I was expecting something totally different. They did not have Hollerith cards. What I did to generate code was I wrote it on a piece of paper, I handed it over to some gals, they entered it in on the PDP machines, and they gave me back a paper tape and a listing. So I fed the paper tape through our development box, which is equivalent to a RAM, and I could basically peek and poke memory and would debug the game. So that was entirely different, probably what you're expecting. When I was doing development, of course, you do a game and you submit your changes for review, and it's like, what do you do for the next hour or so until you do it? So when I got there, I decided to do two games at once. So that was the first time that anybody at Atari actually had done two games at once. So you pop the graphics EEPROMs, you put the new games EEPROMs in, you get one tape, make your changes, submit that, get the last game, swap the EEPROM, and go on. So the development process had changed over the years, and later on we went to a blue box, and they went to X-terms connected to a VAX system. So when you entered your own data, that back in, in Gauntlet days, I was running a 68000, 68010 with a X-term, so it was really different. The process for an arcade game is probably much different than what you might expect. We start with a concept or some kind of idea. You start development. You send it, you get internal reviews. Management comes in and looks at it and says, makes changes, do this, do that. And then you put it out for maybe a focus group where you bring in 10 people. They tell you what they think of your game. And then you take it out to field test. This is really the true test of your game, where you take it out to an arcade and let it play, and the arcade owner tells you how much money it earned. And that'll usually go on for 6-8 weeks, and sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. But generally, it takes about 6 or 8 weeks for the management to decide, okay, we're going to produce this game, or we're going to make this many. And then after that, we have to order parts and so on, and then finally start manufacturing. So this whole process, how long does it take to do Asteroids? Well, 4 or 6 weeks, I probably had the game running. We did 6-8 weeks of field testing, and then they had a decision, and it probably took them another 4 to 6 weeks to get all the parts in. So, over this time, it takes 5 or 6 months before you actually, from start to actually get finished. And then we take it to a show, and we sell the games to to distributors who sell it to operators. That means both arcade owners as well as bars and other locations. So that was the process that we went through for our games. This is a sample memory map, I think for Super Breakout, as a matter of fact. So you look, it has 128 bytes of RAM, 4K of program space, you had 1K of video RAM, and running a 0.75 megahertz processor, a 6502, which is 3 registers, all 8 bits. So if you wanted to do fancy stuff like in Asteroids, where I had 12-bit, basically 12-bit precision, and I had sine and cosine and other things, you had to all do it in an 8-bit processor. So there was a lot of tricks we had to do to actually get things to work. And you'll also notice that everything we were doing in those days was black and white TV, running 225 by 320, maybe even lesser resolution. So it was not particularly high resolution. So if you go play Super Breakout on the floor, you'll see it in color. That's because we had an overlay on top with color lays. So we did not have color TV back in those days. This is the Asteroids memory map. And we've gone up to 1024 bytes of memory. Wow. And 6K of program space, and running a 1.5 megahertz 6502. Again, it's black and white video, but the resolution on the XY monitor is 1024 by 768. That's why it looks like so much better than the old raster games before we even got to color TVs, which also have lower resolution than the XY monitors. This is my original notes for drawing of the ship, because the way you work XY monitors is you tell the machine basically move to this location, turn on the beam, draw to here, draw to here, draw to here, turn off the beam, and go somewhere else. So this is my image of how you draw the spaceship and the appropriate flame when you were moving. And down below is the equations for the appropriate rotations. And yes, I was actually doing sine and cosine on this on an 8-bit machine. It requires a little bit of tricks to do that. And this is the original pictures from my explosions and the saucer. Now, to scale something, you just reduce everything down in size. You don't have to do anything real tricky. You just don't draw as big. And these are the pictures I had for the Asteroids. And again, I just picked a few of them, and I did it with that, and it worked fine. This is the alphanumerics, which I used for, I created for Red Baron and also used in Asteroids. This, if you look at it, is the Asteroids prototype board. We took, was it probably Red Baron, and we modified it for Asteroids, and you'll see all the modifications on this little extra board that's attached to the Asteroids board. So we didn't really have an Asteroids board when I was actually doing it. We just took some other board and modified it. Sometimes, even earlier hardware days, we had wire wrap boards. But in this case, I actually had something to start with. This is, when we do our games, we actually create a flyer, a 2-page flyer that we give to the operators and distributors to promote our games. And this is the one for Asteroids. And the backside gives you all the details about the game. And I'm sorry, your monitors are not big enough, you won't be able to read it. But we actually had a cocktail game for Asteroids as well. And we don't have one here on the floor, but we actually did one. Centipede, people often ask where the ideas came for Centipede or many other games. And please ask me the questions. I got stories for every one of my games. But for Centipede, Atari every year did a brainstorming session where everybody brought ideas, we talked about them, worked them out, and we generated a booklet. And so I hired a new employee, Donna Bailey, to do a game, and I needed to give her a project. So I went through the folder, found this description of Bug Shooter. And I don't know if you can read it. I can read it off to you, but it basically isn't exactly what you think of as Centipede. But I took that idea, and I went off and generated a memo, which this is the memo that I wrote off to my boss at the time, Dan Van Eldren, tell him what I was going to do. So that was the start or the concept for Centipede. This is something interesting. Somebody pointed to me and said, hey, there's an original Centipede, prototype we took out to field test. And they were selling it on eBay for $8,000. And I could not believe it. So I took a picture of the screen. It's just amazing. Atari also had this program where the programmers or the program team could actually pay for a prototype and take it home. And I did that to a lot of my games. I did take a Cabaret Centipede home to my house. So we had that wonderful program. And you probably have heard this. Atari had a world championship for Centipedes. We had like 200 games we took up to an AMA convention. Somebody promoted this, and we also promoted it as well, but it turned out to be a real fiasco. The guy that was sponsored to do this did not have the money to pay the winners. So Atari got sued. We had to pay the winners, and it was a real faux pas. I did a special version for this. It was basically a timed version, see how much you could score in like 3 minutes or something. Interesting knockoff. This is probably a poster you'll never, ever, ever see. There's only a couple dozen in existence. This was the original Centipede poster with a semi-nude woman in a bodysuit. And it was rejected, and there was a traditional poster set, but I happen to have a few copies at home. And my daughter actually has one posted in her home at her house. And this is the actual traditional flyer we send out to distributors and operators. And that's the backside, again, describing all the details. Gauntlet came up from a game, Robin Ziegler and I, he brought in a game called Dandy. I think it was for the Atari ST. And I played it, and I had immediately, okay, I can do a game. My son has been bugging me for years to do a D&D game, and I couldn't figure out how to do one. But when I saw this, okay, I can do a D&D game, and it was called Dungeons, and we started from this scratch. And this was the game design document, the first page of it, that we actually sent out for approval. The hardware for Gauntlet was something we did not have at Atari. I required special additions to our hardware. We had what's called Mach 16, which is 16 motion objects, and you'll see that in Centipede. There are 12 for the Centipede segments, 1 for the shooter, 1 for the shot, and 2 for the spiders, whatever else, scorpions we have running around. So that's our 16 motion objects. For Asteroids, I did something special for that, but for Gauntlet, I required a lot more than that. I had up to 1,000 motion objects I wanted to put on the screen at any one time. So I requested some specific requirements, and an engineer called Pat McCarthy figured out how to do it, and then not only that, improved it from what we had before. So this is the original specs for it. It's, again, 336 by 240 resolution on a color raster TV that we had at the time. We actually had 3 planes. We had an alphanumeric plane, a background plane, and motion objects that were in between. So we actually had more hardware than we had back in Centipede days. This is me doing development on Gauntlet back in our lab. So that's what an Atari lab looks like. That's Chris Downen, and I don't know who else in the background there. Again, this is more of the lab, and that's another shot of the lab. And this again is the flyer for for Gauntlet, excuse me. And Atari also had other promotional items. In the early days, we had these pins from Steel Talons all the way down to Tempest, Centipede, and that we would give away, I don't know, as prizes or just promotions. And they also did hats. I have a Steel Talon hat and patches that you could sew on to whatever uniform you'd like. This This is an interesting story. Somebody came up to me and said, "Where's Logg's Emporium?" And I said, "What the hell are you talking about?" I don't. What's Logg's Emporium? And they went to the back of a Playmeter or a Replay magazine, and somebody did this promotion. This is a promotion for Rush 2049, where it shows all three modes of the game. You have a battle mode, you have the traditional driving mode, and you have a traditional stunt mode. So they had the three different characters sitting in front of Logg's Emporium here, which I thought was really innovative. So I really love this particular ad. This is a picture of my first AMOA, which is where we showed our arcade games. And there's Howie Delman on the left, who was the engineer for Asteroids, John Ray. Down below is Ed Rotberg and Mike Alba, who's we call Dr. Bizarro. The gal is the wench at the restaurant we were at. It was a medieval restaurant. So, and then there's Rich Moore, probably famous for Lunar Lander and Red Baron. Owen Rubin from Major Havoc and Space Duel, and myself on the far right. I was still a young kid and had lots of hair back then. This was the floor of the AMOA as we were setting up. So you see it's always a mess, and I'm sure it's this way here when you bring in all the crates and reassemble everything. And during the show, we have an information booth where everybody comes up and gets their information, questions answered, places orders and whatever. There's Owen Rubin in front of his Major Havoc. So I'm just showing you pictures of some of our people. This is Owen Rubin in front with Al Alcorn, who's one of the founders of Atari, and Walter Day, who sort of got out of the business in 2010. He's went off doing music, I think. But he was in charge of the world records for arcade games, and also generated like trading cards for great people in the arcade business. And this is kind of the dynamic duo. There's Mike Alba again, Dr. Bizarro. He did all our coin routines and did some of the earlier games. Atari Football out there, Mike Alba did. Myself and Franz Lanziger, who did Crystal Castles. He's probably most famous for that. This is at one of the arcades where I actually had some of my cohorts up, and we were talking about all the games and stories we had done about our games. Mike Halley, myself, I don't know, Owen Rubin and Mike Alba. And again, all of us lining up. Ed Rotberg, famous for Battlezone, probably most famous for Mike Alba, Al Alcorn again, Howie Delman, Owen Rubin, and myself. This is the entire team that worked on Gauntlet. So Pat, on the far right, on my far right, is Pat McCarthy and myself and everybody else. A lot of the testers, artists, and everybody else is part of the team. So that's the size of a team around 1985. And when I joined in 78, it was myself as programmer, a part-time technician, part-time engineer, and a team leader who was kind of leading a couple of projects. So the teams had changed quite a bit. Now, when we get out to Dr. Muto, this is in 1992 or 4? Yeah, 92, 93. Look at the size of the team now. It's really changed. This is all the Atari employees of 1992. This is our 20th anniversary picture out in the back in the Milpitas parking lot. That just gives you some idea of how many people were there. Here's a list of all my games. At this point, I wanted just for you to come up and ask questions, because I don't want to just talk about stuff I want to talk about. I want to hear what you want to hear. Can I tell you stories about every one of these games? So I'm leaving this screen up just to give you some idea of some games that you may want to ask questions about. So if you do, please come up to the microphone over here so they can record your voice, and I'll gladly answer any questions you have. And I have stories up the kazoo, and I was telling some yesterday until I lost my voice. So I've been kind of staying off the floor so I don't lose my voice. Yes, go ahead.
Afternoon, Ed. Are there any games, early games for Atari that you worked on that were never released?
Yes, when I joined, I took over for Dennis Coble. You'll probably remember him from Sonic Hedgehog and other fame, but he just finished Avalanche, so I took that to production. I didn't do anything more than just handhold it to production, and he was doing Dirt Bike at the time. So I was assigned Dirt Bike. And at that time, Owen Rubin, who you'd seen in some of the pictures, at lunch said, oh, Nolan Bushnell said that he wanted to do another Breakout version. And I said, I can do that. So I was doing Dirt Bike and Super Breakout at the same time. And I field tested both of those games at the same time. Super Breakout won, so Dirt Bike never made it in production. Now, if you ask a lot of the Atari people, they will tell you every other game Ed does is a hit or gets into production. That's basically true. I'd start a game, look at it and say, oh, God, this sucks. And I'd kill it, which almost never happens in the game industry. Everybody thinks it's their baby and we'll drag it out to infinite ends, but I'll get to a point and say, nah, I'll kill it. Does that answer your question? Yes.
Which game puts the biggest smile on your face and which one doesn't? And why, if you want to let us in on?
I don't really have a favorite game. All of them, God, there's so many stories for every game. Gauntlet had, I'll start with Gauntlet. But as I said, when I started out, I needed hardware to do it. So I spec'd out what I wanted for hardware. It got done. And then marketing would come and say, no, you can't get 4 people around a monitor and play a game. I said, well, let me try. I had done Asteroids, Centipede, so at Atari, I had a lot of pull. I could go ahead and do stuff that anybody else couldn't do. So marketing didn't think it can get done. The other thing, of course, was it would be a large PC board. It would have issues. I wanted to do something different. I wanted to make it smaller. So I wanted to go to a 4-layer PC board, which is a power ground, and then the traces on the top and the bottom, which is much different than you'll see a lot of PC boards out there. We did not have the CAD equipment to do 4-layer boards, so they had to go get appropriate software to do it. Manufacturing would be a problem. The cost was a problem. They thought it was too expensive. And by the time I was done, everybody was doing 4-layer boards. And there's another good thing about 4-layer boards. If you're familiar with RF interference, many years ago in the early days of the industry, somebody had a video game out there that was interfering with the band the police were on. And the police found out where it was, and the FCC came after him and said, okay, guys, you do an arcade games, you're going to have to knock off the RF noise. So we built cages. We tested them in anechoic chambers. And I actually went in the anechoic chamber, shut the door, and kind of weird to hear the blood going through your ears. It's really strange. Anyway, it goes on and on with, everything I had to do to get that game done. It was just one hurdle after another. For example, I did not put any plex in front of the monitor because all the fluorescent lights would just create blind spots and people could not see it. So I wanted to do a game without a plex. And marketing said, no, you can't do that. Operators wouldn't buy a game with no plex. And it really was a problem. We had to take operators and throw basically steel balls at the monitor to show that they would not break. So it was just one hurdle after another. And then when the earnings came in, marketing kind of shut up. But it was, it had to be proofed by example before I could actually build that.
So no particular game that you worked on was like the problem child?
Problem child.
Yeah, a lot of work.
Well, that one was certainly a lot more work than all the other games, that's for sure. I can't think of him a problem child. That's what I never really had a problem child like that.
Just curious.
So I always got around any problems I ran into. Yes.
Hi. So I was 9 years old in '85, and was definitely a child of Dungeons and Dragons, things like that. And there was an arcade I would spend a lot of time at, right up 3 blocks up from my house, and we got Gauntlet there. And Gauntlet, I had never played anything like Gauntlet before, and I was really, really awful at it. And there would be these high school kids and college kids that would come, and it was a college town. They'd come and they would play. They got really good, and so I would just watch them play over and over and again. And it did 2 things. One, it caused me to steal so much money from my grandma's purse just so I could have quarters to go up to the arcade. So I'm holding you personally responsible for my theft as a 9-year-old. But it also, that game was one of the first ones I remember playing where it had digitized voice. And I'm a voice actor now.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that was inspired from hearing the announcer in Gauntlet. And it got me wondering, I had no idea you were here today, and so it was kind of a treat. But how was the voice done in that game, on that hardware and everything?
Well, again, as I said, I wanted to make it a D&D game, so I needed a dungeon master. And
Right.
the voice was the dungeon master egging you on. And I couldn't, ask the traditional D&D questions of what do you do, roll the dice. It was a case of, egging you on in some way. So if it's a case of the green elf has eaten all the food lately, something like that, that was the appropriate egging on that I wanted to do. So that was the dungeon master voice. It was done by a professional voice actor. We had a audio group in Atari, so they would take the voice actor and record that. And I don't know, I can't remember how it was stored or how it was played back. I'm not an audio person, so I can't answer that. But that's how it came about.
Okay.
And I think it's one of the first games Atari did with real voice in it.
Yeah, for sure. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay. And by the way, I've heard so many people say, you took my milk money away. I stole money on my mom's purse to play your games. And my answer to that is I married somebody who was a teacher. So I corrupted the kids. She took the, it was the yin and yang. It took care of it. Evened out in the end, I guess you'd say.
I had a question about Super Breakout.
Yes.
It has 3 options.
There used to be 6 when I first did it.
Oh.
And I had visions of like 2 games in each and building 3 different games. But management kind of killed us on we could only do 1 game. So I said I picked the 3 that I like best.
So they broke it down to 3.
Yes.
And how did you come up with the mathematics for the progressive, knowing how many hits where it would increase the flow?
I had played the original Breakout. And I guessed, the original Breakout, by the way, was all done in hardware. There's no software. So I didn't have anything software to go off and say, it was at this angle and that stuff. So I just guessed. So I made my own rules.
Very good. All right, thanks.
And as a separate note, I know somebody asked Roger about something that they regret. And there's one regret. When Arkanoid came out, it was kind of like, oh, God, why didn't I think of that? I'd done Super Breakout. It's like, I should have thought of Arkanoid.
Is it true you worked on or created the Tengen NES Tetris?
That is absolutely correct. The story of Tetris, from my perspective, is I played it, I think on an ST or something like that. I saw it. I went to Dennis Wood, who's our chief counsel, and said, get the license for this. So he went to the English holder who got it from the Hungarian who licensed it from the Russians. So yes, we had the license. I did a game and we showed it at the January CES. Management said, no, we wanted something, maybe it was gray shades. So I found, and they said they wanted it improved a little bit. So I said, I figured out a way to do it in color. So I did all the pieces in color, and we showed it again in June, the June CES. And we started production. And then, of course, we got, my take on what happened is Nintendo went to the Russians and said, here's $1 million. We want the license for game systems. Even though the game system is called the family computer, we had the license for computers. And so, Russians, if I were Russians, I'd take their money too and let them fight it out. I don't care. I'll take the money from both ends.
part of my question is, as a developer myself, one of the biggest challenges is you work on a project for a long time and then it's canceled. In your case, it came out, and frankly, I think it's a great version, but then it was destroyed, right? It wasn't allowed to be sold. Did that affect you, or were you able to separate the project from any emotional aspect?
Oh, hell no. Does the words mad as hell mean anything to you?
Got it.
There's some interesting stories of that because it was actually in production for a while. You could go down to your Blockbuster and rent the basic NES cartridge and go home and play it. And the story was that people go down, rent it, report it lost, pay their $40-50, and sell it on eBay for $200. And so all the the NES versions of Tetris from Tengen basically disappeared into home use.
Yep.
I actually there was a few that fell off the back of the truck that I have at home, but other than that, yeah, I think that's basically it. There's another story that, speaking of Tetris, many years later, early 2000s, I was working on games for a set-top box for your TVs. So we would actually download the video and you could play games. And our CEO went to, I think it was Blue Planet in Hawaii at the time that owned the license, and they wanted to get the license for Tetris. So she walks in and the CEO gives the long spiel about, Tetris and how great a game it is. And here on the wall, he says, the greatest game ever done of Tetris, and it's Tengen's Tetris on the wall. And she just smiled and said, yeah, the same programmer did that's going to do our version.
And
So it's a small world.
Just a quick thank you, my wife, who couldn't make it. She's not a fan of video games at all, but she loves Centipede. She's always loved it, so she wanted me to say thanks to Centipede.
Well, thank you. I couldn't be here without all the players playing the game. Yes.
Oh, hey. I always think of like Space Invaders as like that pivotal moment where all games before it are kind of different from almost all games after it, where you go to that infinite man versus machine. Although Breakout was sort of that way also. Was there kind of like this thunderclap moment when Space Invaders hit the streets at Atari, where it said we got to rethink everything, and and then my follow-up is Atari never really kind of got into cute games or character games till like Crystal Castles.
Well, Crystal Castles is one of the closest and earliest ones I can think of. I had done a game, took it to field test actually with 2 prototypes, and it didn't earn enough. But one of the guys field tested it, thought it was his favorite game at all, so he bought it from Atari. So there are 2 prototypes of Maze Invaders out there, and one of them's currently owned by the guy who field tested it, and he thought it was his favorite game. I don't know where the other one is. Wow. But there's only like 2 prototypes of Maze Invaders. Wow, amazing. And it was a Pac-Man style cutesy game.
But was Space Invaders kind of like this,
No,
moment?
it didn't. It wasn't any epiphany or, doing things like this. I just can't think of anything that changed. We did get into licensing. We tried looking at 3D, with the headsets. They asked me to go out and evaluate one of the original 3D, headsets. And I go like this, and the video would be like this. And I said, oh, God, I'm getting sick. The latency was so bad that you just get sick trying to change different directions.
So what is it about using the 4-layer boards to reduce the EMI and RF?
Basically the ground and normally you have to put a bunch of capacitors between power and ground to reduce the noise on the board. But with the power and ground, it just seemed to kill all the signals. The traces would often emit stuff. Basically noise, and they would basically kill a lot of that. So we took the anechoic chamber, and our noise levels on most games are up here, and ours are way down here. So it was like so much easier to do that. In fact, this is another side story. The board was so small. If you've ever seen these bar top games that were about this wide, about this tall, their monitor, little tiny control panel. When my boss was off on vacation, I took a gauntlet, stuck it in there, power supply, had him build a new harness, made a separate control panel and put a 2-player gauntlet on his desk. It was only about this big, and stuck it on his desk so when he returned from vacation, he could see the game. We didn't produce any of those, but it was so interesting just that we could stick a 4-layer board and actually stick it in a bar top game.
Okay, thank you.
So when I heard you were going to be here, I looked at your resume, as it were, the game, the list of games that you had up on the screen there, and I was surprised because I didn't remember you having done Wayne Gretzky hockey, but I also haven't had my N64 out of storage forever and a day. The question I want to ask about that is, did it always have the catch-up mechanism in it, the basically rubber banding?
I added a lot of things. I don't remember. I can't tell you what the coin-op version had because I took the original coin-op version and ported it to the N64. Some of the things I did add were like instant replay, so you can see the puck hit off the crossbar or something and bounce off, or it hit somebody's shin and bounce off.
Yeah, because the thing I always remembered about it was that if you were losing in the third period of a game, you could basically shoot from your own blue line and it would go in.
That is a traditional. I mean, you see it like in Cruising USA or in San Francisco Rush. When you're behind, you have extra boost. You can go faster than you could if you were in the lead. Exactly. And yes, that's traditional coin-op tricks.
Sure.
To try to even up the game, because if somebody gets way ahead and they're that much skilled, you want to even up the game somewhat. Now, what most people don't realize, we do a lot of tuning in our games, and for example, I see a lot of games out there. I've played a lot of games, and they have like linear ramping, so that it starts out easy and gets harder and harder and harder, but that's not how people's reactions work. We're logarithmic. So the difficulty should be like this. And that's how I make my games. That's one of my tricks to my games, is you don't, increase the speed by 5% every time. You do it like log of 5% every time. And you'll see that for example, in Tetris. A lot of games just get to a point where you can't react fast enough. But the logarithmic is just good enough that you feel like you can do it, and it seems to work. So that's one of my tricks to actually ramping up video games, because some of the games I run into, they're just an absolute wall. You get to a certain point and you're dead.
Yeah, you hit the wall and it doesn't. You're not.
You can't do anything.
Well, you're not encouraged to play any further. You lose interest. Something shiny shows up, and you move on to the next game. Right. So, anyhow, thank you.
Okay. Did anybody else have any questions? I can go into a few stories on some of the games.
Well, since you talked about the logarithms,
yes. No pun intended there, yes.
I always wondered, like, when something like Asteroids had been in the street for months and months, and now you have hundreds of thousands of Americans practicing and playing, and some can play with enough ships that run off the edge. But you wouldn't have really probably been able to get that good and test that level of play internally. Like, you would either be worried to make it too hard where no one could get that good, or not hard enough where people could play forever. How did you kind of cope with that compressed time?
Well, let me take a step back. I'm not sure you're aware of the ARPANET back in the early 1970s. Well, somebody had taken the code from MIT and ported it up to the Stanford AI lab. And I was a grad student in 71, 72, so I played Space War basically on a PDP machine up at the AI lab, and they had their little prototype little box. So the ship space and a lot of this game came from Space War. A lot of Asteroids came from Space War. The ship shape, a lot of the attributes. The other part of your story is, did I think lurking would work? I actually tried it, and I could play it, and I didn't think it would work. But then I made a change, because the way the XY monitors work, sometimes as you play the game, the screen gets, the video gets a little bigger, and it's off the edge of the screen. So Saucer come in and shoot before you could even see it. So they said, all right, give the guy a half second wait before you shoot. That allowed lurking to happen. So I fixed one problem and caused another. Then the operators, of course, complained that the game people would play forever. for me, it was like, yeah, if you're really good, you could play forever. What's the problem? I want to reward. Let me take a step back from that. Nolan Bushnell had a philosophy of 1 quarter, 90 seconds. A wall at 90 seconds. He wanted people to get off the machine after 90 seconds. That was not my philosophy. My philosophy is, if you're good, you should be able to play longer. I want you to play longer. I want people to see that if you're good, there are other strategies, you can play longer. So I want them to keep coming back. So that was my philosophy. So I had no problem with Asteroids people playing if it was not easy and it required a lot of skill. So I didn't have a problem with that. Some problems I ran into, and I wish I had more hindsight, is if you play Asteroids for a long period of time, your number of extra lives, of course, add up. And if I'm drawing all the ships, and unfortunately, it slows down the video. So it makes it easier for you to play. So the good side is you can get up and go to the bathroom, come back, and you still have enough lives. The bad side is the screen slows down. So, I should have thought ahead and say, no more than 6 lives or something, done something to take care of that, but that was one of the faux pas. So, yes, there are bugs in my games that actually go out. If you ever see a cocktail centipede, play the second player. I had industrial design come over one day and say, when you play the second player in the cocktail, they always do score a lot better. I said, well, I'll come over and you show me. I walked over and I said, oh, no. You know how in Centipede, the spider comes in, he has a certain range, and it gets smaller and smaller as your score gets higher? In the second player, the range goes like this. So you can stay on the bottom and not get hit. Oops. Millipede had a bug in it that, Eric Jenner said there's some guy from Florida says he can start off at 300,000 points or whatever. And I went back and looked at the code. Oh, shit. Yep, he's right. There's a bug in Tempest that if you hit a certain score, you get 22 extra lives. Or you get 22 credits, excuse me. And you know how that came about? We tried to keep people from copying our PC boards. So one of the tricks was you look around, and if anybody's been monkeying with the code, you do different things. Classic thing is to put it in decimal mode. Just causes if the 6502 goes crazy doing decimal mode, things just go absolutely berserk. But Dave Toyer in Tempest, he added credits, and this would, of course, any operator giving free credits away would screw up the earnings and screw the game. Well, he made a change, and he forgot to fix the checkpoint that basically allowed that to happen. So it would get 22 credits. Now, other things happened too, like in Asteroids, the operators said, people are playing forever. We want a version where you don't play forever. So I created a version that prevented, basically lurking. And they put it in their games and immediately took it out and put the old ones back because the game wouldn't earn. So that's what happens. So if you have questions, I have a little bit of extra time, so I'm going to pick one of my games. And by the way, I actually have 6 of my games out on the floor. I have Video Pinball and Centipede, Millipede, I think there's an Asteroids out there. Cocktail Asteroids, maybe. And then there's a couple other games I'm associated with, like football and Rush 2049 and Rush the Rock. Rush the Rock had an interesting story. I was doing San Francisco Rush for the N64, and I asked marketing if I could put Rush the Rock as one of my secret levels in there. And, oh, no, absolutely not. No, we want to do it. But I stuck it in anyway. Unfortunately, the Easter egg to enable it was a little too easy, and people found it within a few weeks, so I got in trouble. It's not the first time I've gotten in trouble. I've done a lot of things to get in trouble over the years. The last one was in Dr. Mute. I was in Milpitas, and we had a large group, as you saw from the picture. So I had I was in charge of the programmers, but the programmers are on the other side of this wall. So I had to walk all the way around. I had to talk to the programmers. So, I knew in the old days there used to be a door right here. So I asked if we could, put a door in. No, we don't want to put a door in. So one day I brought in a hammer and a saw to basically create a door where the door used to be. So I managed to knock a hole in there, look in to make sure there's no new electrical things, and the head of facilities came by at that point, gave me a look like, "What are you doing? Putting in a door?" Well, stop. Well, next day there was a door there. So that shows you, definitely ask for forgiveness. But that's, Ed Logg has done a lot of things like that. You just do them and ask for forgiveness later because it's right. Let me tell you a few other stories. Like, let's see, pick Steel Talons. Steel Talons was this side-by-side game. It was a helicopter simulation. You do not have it. There's not a lot of them out there, but a couple interesting stories. When we put out the field test, I went out to watch the first few people play it. And the first time, when people get shot, I have a pinball, a solenoid, the extra play solenoid right underneath their seat. So they get hit by that solenoid. I found out later we were overdriving the solenoid. So it was much harder than it should have been. But this player that first got hit, boy, he practically jumped out of the cabinet. The other interesting story about it is I went to collect the earnings after a week's earning. And if you're familiar with it, I have to kind of reach in like this and lift it, with monitors kind of lift this box to get out the coin door. Well, I couldn't budge it. So I had to stick my head in, and I realized it had so many coins in it, it was like 40 pounds. And so you had to put a little sign in there that said, tell their operators, empty the coin box every day or two, otherwise you won't be able to get it out to collect it. So it's one of those promotional unexpected advertisements. Yes.
I would love to know how the process was of converting coin-op Rush into the N64 version. What sort of tool chains did you use? What was the conversion process like? And kind of techniques you used to kind of port it from hardware that is pretty powerful for the time in the coin-op version versus the N64 and its kind of limited capacity for hardware.
Yeah, that's an interesting story, and I don't remember all the details. But a lot of things, for example, we had the artwork, so we could regenerate the artwork. But we had to do a lot of artwork because we couldn't draw all that stuff. The N64 was not capable of that, so I had to generate a layer, a certain distance where fog basically took over and you couldn't see beyond. And I had the world broken up into pieces, and only when you got to a certain point could I enable another piece. And I suppose it would come out of the fog, but every now and then you see it popping, stuff popping in. But so fogging was the trick I used to deal with that. And so I had to do a lot with that. But there was another problem. The N64 had what we called a crossing the T's problem, or if you drew a polygon like this and another polygon came up and draw there, the way you do the math is it sometimes tears like this, and so you see a seam that pops out. So we had to do a lot of touch-up of the art, but then it generates extra vertices, which slows down the drawing. And so I had to go tell the coin-op artist, don't do that. Don't cross the T on me because it screws up. The Dreamcast version, which we did not have that problem. So the Dreamcast was so much better at it, and you didn't have that crossing the T's. Speaking of fog, Steel Talons, I went to the engineer and I said, I wanted to do fogging for Steel Talons because we had the same problem. You can see a long ways, and I need to, fog things in. And I said, can you change your microcode on your processors to do fog? No, we can't do fog. So I looked at that and said, God, I've got a ton of color palettes. I'm just going to use the color palettes. So I did color palettes based on distance, so I could fog that game in. And I had the engineer, I caught the engineer on one weekend. He brought his girlfriend in to show the fogging on Steel Talons in my development lab, so I know he was impressed.
Very cool. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, another story with Steel Talons. I actually went down to Monterey. The old Fort Ord had a helicopter simulator, so I got to fly the simulator. It was a full motion simulator, so it was rather interesting. And I found out later that he got grief. The Army came in and said, basically, why did you let these guys in here? And he basically said, it's my facility. I can let in whoever damn well please. And then I also found out the Army was concerned that they had, and I was using a proprietary elevator on the helicopter, which is supposed to be secret. And it's like, are you kidding me? I got 50 polygons drawing that helicopter. I don't have time to do an elevator or anything fancy, but it's just all this stuff that you hear in the background that it's like, no. Yes?
Did you do anything with copy protection in the hardware?
Yes, we did. We actually had, well, early days, let's go back to early. Centipede did not have any hardware protection, but I had software protection. I'll give you an example. There was a company up in Canada that ripped off Centipede and called it something else, and they changed a little bit of the artwork. And of course, the copyright Atari disappeared after the bottom, and I was called as an expert witness. The other expert witness said basically, well, the game looks different, so therefore it's different. And I dumped the EPROMs, and byte for byte, it's identical, except for the copyright message, and stuff like that. So, and not only that, I did a Morse code version of copyright Atari stuck in the program somewhere, and they didn't catch that. So, I took the court and said, hey, they have a copyright Atari and Morse code stuck in there. And its sole purpose is just to protect these people like that. Now, in later games, for example, I think it was Gauntlet, we had Pokey chips. And we were hearing all over the place where people were trying to get VCSs, which also had the Pokey, which was for audio, our Pokey chip, or they were trying to find Pokey chips on the market. So we knew there were people trying to copy Gauntlet and just steal, get Pokey chips to do it. Later on in games, we had special chips that we had to hit in various ways to keep the system from resetting. We had a watchdog, which is basically you ping an address every now and then to say, I'm alive, I'm alive. And if the watchdog doesn't get reset, it resets the game. And so basically, if you don't hit these chips in some very obscure fashions in some way, then the game would reset. So we had much more protection later on.
Okay, thank you.
Any other interesting tidbits you want to hear about? I mean, every story's got crazy stories. Super Breakout, for example, at the end of the coin-op, we brought our field test games back. The consumer wanted to do a Super Breakout for a VCS, the Atari 2600. And I said, sure. You want to take the game up and use it as an example, play it, and make sure. They did. And about a year later, I said, I want to get my game back, take it home. So Friday night, I went up. There was nobody in the consumer division. So I got a hand truck, got the Atari truck, took the game, hauled it home, came back Monday, and I found out the police had been called. Somebody stole their game. And I said, no, it's mine. No, it's ours. No, it's mine. No, it's ours. No, I paid $50 for it. It's mine. So yes, Atari had a wonderful program. We could actually buy the prototype games after they were done field testing. And so I paid $50 for a lot of stuff. So I actually had like 9 games at home. Other interesting story, one of the games was not mine, it was my wife's. She had played Asteroids early on and liked the game so much she bought it. And this is all before I met her. So in a 1987 Atari Christmas party, I was introduced to her by my former office mate, Ed Rotberg, as being the best. He didn't say the best what, but as the best. So we started dating a year after. So it's a small world. Any other questions?
Was Steel Talons an evolution of the hard drive and hardware?
Yes, it was.
And what was it like? That was a huge increment jump for the hard drive and hardware. What was the development of that like?
It was actually not an incremental jump from the hard drive and hardware. I paid somebody to give me a helicopter simulator, the source code, and then I modified it. And by the way, I didn't do it quite right. So if you can do it, if you're really good at it, you can get the helicopter fly faster than it should. So that's one of those little bugs in the program that, you should put checks in and to basically say, no, it's going over 180 miles an hour. No, just kill it. Keep him at 180. That's another bug in one of my games. You know, Gauntlet had a bug in it too. Somebody said you could do something. I looked at the code. Yep. And it's actually different. Gauntlet was done in Japan. That was our first game that we actually broke into Japan with. And it's interesting. Japan has a different social structure. In U.S., there's no problem. You walk up to a game, you play it. You don't ask the guys if you can join them. In Japan, it's polite to ask the guy, "Can I join you?" And he will always say no, because with two of the characters, you can play it forever. Because I was not smart enough to say, you know, if there's 2 or fewer players, reduce the amount of food. So if you could play the Wizard or the Hulk, you could play forever as one player. Another bug in my games. So yeah, it's amazing, you know, what you can get through. Something that most people don't realize, and it's never advertised, is all of my games have been on time and under budget. And you never hear about that in the video game business. And you can't put that on your resume, your business card, let's put it that way. And that's one of my strongest points, you know, when you're doing a small team, is to actually get games on time and under budget. And, you know, a lot of people have asked me to, you know, review these other games. I take one look at their sheet and say, it's never going to make it on time. Well, why? Well, let's see. You're going to do a year project. You have no time allocated for vacation. Oh, okay. What about holidays? Oh, okay. What about reviews? Because you like to freeze the game, you know, 3 days before reviews, and you have to deal with all the changes that are going to come after the reviews. So there's no time allocated for that. And testing. 2 weeks for testing. No. You know, you give yourself 6 to 8 weeks for testing. So, and you just take one look at it and say, no, it's not going to meet it. And you can give all the reasons why. And just, you know, simple stuff. And, you know, of course, in those days, they said, yeah, we'll just make the guys work 7 days a week, you know, 80-hour weeks. No, it doesn't work that way. You know, in an industry, you know, where I was at, where you wanted to retain people, you don't do that. So it looks like my time is up. I will be here afterwards if you have any other questions. I'm glad to answer them. Okay, well, thank you for coming.
Ed Logg, everybody.